The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Ben pushed his cleaning cart through the glass doors of Sterling Industries. The tall building hummed with the quiet energy of a day winding down. Executives packed their leather briefcases and headed for the parking garage where their expensive cars waited. Ben nodded politely to the few people who passed him, though most looked right through him as if he were part of the furniture. Ben wore a simple blue uniform with his name stitched on the pocket. The fabric was clean but showed signs of wear around the edges. His hands, rough from years of hard work, gripped the cart handle as he made his way to the elevator. He had been cleaning these offices for 3 years now, and the routine never changed. Start on the 20th floor, work his way down, finish by midnight, then rush home to catch a few hours of sleep before his morning shift at the warehouse began. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor. Ben stepped out and began his work in the hallway lined with expensive artwork and polished marble floors. Through the large windows, he could see the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. It was beautiful, but Ben barely had time to notice. His mind was already calculating the bills that needed paying and wondering if his daughter Emma had finished her homework. Emma was 8 years old with bright eyes and a smile that could light up any room. His son David was 6, full of energy and questions about everything. They were the reason Ben worked 2 jobs, the reason he pushed himself through exhaustion every single day. Since their mother died in a car accident 2 years ago, Ben had become everything to them: father, mother, provider, and protector. Ben started cleaning the first office. He emptied the trash can, wiped down the desk, and vacuumed the carpet. The office belonged to someone named Mr. Richardson, according to the nameplate on the door. Ben had never spoken to Mr. Richardson, though he had seen him many times. The man wore suits that probably cost more than Ben made in 2 months. As Ben worked, he could hear voices from the conference room down the hall. Sterling Industries was hosting a celebration for their latest business deal. The company had just signed a major contract that would bring in millions of dollars. Ben had read about it in the company newsletter that someone had thrown away. He found it interesting how businesses worked, how deals were made and money moved around. He had always been good with numbers and planning, but life had taken him down a different path. Ben moved to the next office, then the next. Each space told a story through the personal items left behind. Family photos showed smiling faces on vacation trips to places Ben could only dream of visiting. Expensive pens lay scattered on desks next to business cards from high-end restaurants. These people lived in a world that felt like another planet compared to his small apartment across town. The conference room was getting louder as Ben approached. Through the glass walls, he could see about 20 people in business suits holding wine glasses and small plates of fancy food. They were laughing and talking about the successful deal. Ben knocked gently on the door and pointed to his cleaning supplies, asking if he could empty the trash. "Oh, just come back later," said a woman in a red dress without really looking at him. "We'll be here for a while." Ben nodded and moved on to other offices. He understood. These people were celebrating something important, and he was just the janitor. He would come back when they were finished. An hour later, the celebration was still going strong. Ben had cleaned all the other offices on the floor and needed to finish the conference room to stay on schedule. His next job started at 6 a.m., which meant he needed to be home by 1 a.m. to get at least 4 hours of sleep. Ben knocked on the door again. This time, a tall man in an expensive suit opened it. "What do you need?" the man asked, looking annoyed. "Sorry sir, I just need to empty the trash and clean up a little," Ben said quietly. The man sighed. "Fine, but be quick about it." Ben pushed his cart into the room, trying to be as invisible as possible. The conversation continued around him as if he were not there. He emptied the small trash cans and began wiping down the table where people had been eating. "Did you see the bonus numbers for this quarter?" a woman was saying to her friend. "I'm thinking about buying that house in the mountains I was telling you about." "Oh, the one with the pool and the tennis court," her friend replied. "That sounds amazing. I just bought a new car myself." A BMW. It was so expensive, but I deserve it after all the hard work this year. Ben continued cleaning, trying not to listen. He was happy that these people were doing well, but it was hard not to think about his own situation. His car was 15 years old and making strange noises. He was saving every penny he could, but car repairs were expensive. I don't understand how some people live, another voice said. Ben looked up and saw a group of 3 men standing near the window. They were looking in his direction, and Ben realized they were talking about him. I mean, look at this guy, the first man continued, gesturing toward Ben. He's got to be what, 35? And he's still cleaning offices for minimum wage. Some people just don't have what it takes, the second man agreed. No education, no ambition. They're happy just getting by. The third man laughed. My kid is 8 years old and probably smarter than half these janitors. I bet this guy can barely read. Ben felt his face grow hot with embarrassment and anger. He kept cleaning, but his hands were shaking slightly. These men knew nothing about his life, his struggles, or his children. They had no idea that he had graduated high school with good grades but had to start working immediately to support his family. They did not know that he read to his children every night, helping them with homework and encouraging them to dream big. Look at his clothes, the first man said, loud enough for others to hear. Probably shops at thrift stores. I spend more on lunch than this guy makes in a day. More people were starting to pay attention to the conversation. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything to stop it. Ben wanted to leave, but he still had work to finish. He needed this job. His children needed this job. I heard these cleaning people don't even need background checks, the second man said. They just hire anyone off the street. Kind of scary if you ask me. Yeah, and they have access to all our offices, the third man added. Who knows what they might steal or what information they might sell. Ben's heart was pounding. He had never stolen anything in his life. He was honest and hardworking, and he took pride in doing his job well. But these people saw him as less than human, as someone to be suspicious of and mocked. A woman in a blue dress joined the conversation. It's really sad when you think about it, she said in a voice that was meant to sound sympathetic but came across as condescending. These people probably have no other options. No skills, no education. This is probably the best they can do. Well, someone has to do the dirty work, the first man said with a laugh. Just glad it's not me. The group laughed together, and Ben felt smaller and smaller. He finished cleaning the table and moved to empty the trash can near where they were standing. As he reached for it, the first man deliberately stepped closer, making Ben squeeze past him. Excuse me, Ben said politely. Oh, he speaks English, the man said to his friends, causing another round of laughter. I was starting to wonder. Ben's hands were shaking more now. He thought about Emma and David at home, probably already asleep in their small shared bedroom. He thought about the bills on his kitchen table and the groceries he needed to buy tomorrow. He thought about the car that might break down any day and the winter coats his children would need soon. You know what I don't understand, the woman in the blue dress was saying, is why these people don't just get better jobs. I mean, there are opportunities out there if you really want them. Exactly, the second man agreed. It's all about motivation. Some people are just lazy. Ben wanted to tell them about his warehouse job, how he worked 16 hours a day, how he had applied for dozens of better positions but never heard back. He wanted to tell them about the night classes he had tried to take but had to quit because he could not afford childcare. He wanted to explain that he was not lazy or unmotivated, just trapped in a cycle that was hard to break. But Ben said nothing. He finished emptying the trash and pushed his cart toward the door. Behind him, the laughter and conversation continued. He had become their entertainment for the evening, a target for their cruel jokes and assumptions. As Ben left the conference room, he heard the first man say, well, at least we know our place in the world. Some people are meant to lead, and others are meant to follow. That's just how it is. Ben walked to the elevator with his cleaning cart, feeling more alone than he had since his wife died. The building seemed colder now, the lights harsher. He still had 5 more floors to clean before his shift ended, but all he wanted was to go home and hug his children. The elevator doors closed, and Ben saw his reflection in the polished metal. He looked tired, older than his 34 years. But behind the exhaustion, there was something else in his eyes. A determination that these cruel people could not take away. He was not just a janitor. He was a father who would do anything to give his children a better life than he had. Ben straightened his shoulders and pushed the button for the next floor. He had work to finish. 3 weeks passed since the night Ben first heard the cruel words from the executives at Soulline Industries. Each evening when he arrived for his cleaning shift, the memory of their laughter echoed in his mind. He tried to push it away, focusing on his work and thinking about his children waiting at home, but the hurt remained like a bruise that would not heal. Emma had noticed something was wrong. At breakfast that morning, she had looked at her father with concern in her bright 8-year-old eyes. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, stirring her cereal slowly. "You seem sad." Ben forced a smile and ruffled her hair. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Emma was smart, too smart sometimes. She watched her father carefully as he packed their lunches for school. David, her younger brother, was busy playing with his toy cars and making engine noises, but Emma could sense when something was bothering their dad. "Is it because of work?" she asked quietly. Ben stopped what he was doing and knelt down beside her chair. "Emma, I want you to listen to me. No matter what job someone does, no matter how much money they make, every person deserves respect. Do you understand that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Yes, Daddy. And you remember that your daddy works very hard to take care of you and David. There's nothing wrong with any honest work." "I know, Daddy. You're the best daddy in the whole world." Ben hugged his daughter tightly, feeling his eyes sting with tears he would not let fall. These children were his everything, and he would endure any humiliation to provide for them. That evening at Soulline Industries, Ben noticed something different in the air. The building was buzzing with excitement and activity. Banners had been hung in the lobby announcing the completion of a massive merger deal. The company had just purchased 3 smaller firms, making Soulline Industries one of the largest corporations in the state. It was the biggest business deal in the company's history. As Ben pushed his cart through the halls, he saw employees setting up decorations for what looked like a major celebration. Tables were being arranged in the large conference room, and catering trucks were arriving with fancy food and drinks. This was going to be much bigger than the small celebration he had witnessed 3 weeks ago. Ben started his cleaning routine on the upper floors, hoping to finish most of his work before the party began. But as the evening progressed, more and more people arrived for the celebration. The building filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and conversation. By 9 o'clock, the party was in full swing. Ben had managed to clean most of the offices, but he still needed to work around the celebration areas. He approached the main conference room where the party was happening and knocked gently on the door. A woman in an elegant black dress opened the door. She looked annoyed at the interruption. "What do you want?" she asked sharply. "I'm sorry to bother you," Ben said politely. "I just need to empty the trash cans in here when you have a chance." The woman looked him up and down with obvious distaste. "We're having an important celebration here. Can't this wait until tomorrow?" "I'm really sorry, but I have to finish tonight. I have another job in the morning." The woman sighed loudly. "Fine, but stay out of the way." Ben pushed his cart into the room, trying to be as quiet and invisible as possible. The space was packed with well-dressed people celebrating the merger. Everyone looked happy and successful, holding glasses of expensive wine and eating fancy appetizers from silver trays. Ben worked his way around the edge of the room, emptying small trash cans and wiping down surfaces that needed cleaning. Most people ignored him completely, but he could feel some eyes watching his movements with disapproval. Near the corner of the room, Ben recognized the group of men who had mocked him 3 weeks earlier. They were standing together, drinks in hand, talking loudly about the merger and how much money it would bring to the company. "This deal is going to make us all very rich," the tall man in the expensive suit was saying. "I'm already planning my vacation to Europe next month. I heard the bonuses this year are going to be incredible," another man added. "Finally, we can live the way we deserve to live." As Ben worked nearby, emptying a trash can, the first man noticed him and nudged his friends. "Look who's here," he said with a smirk. "Our favorite janitor." The other men turned to look at Ben, and their expressions changed to ones of amusement and cruelty. "Oh yeah, I remember him," the second man said. "Still wearing the same old uniform, I see." Ben tried to move away, but the men stepped closer, blocking his path slightly. "You know," the first man said, speaking loudly enough for others nearby to hear, "I was thinking about our conversation last time. About how some people just don't have what it takes to succeed." Ben's heart began to race, but he kept working, hoping they would lose interest and move on. "I mean, look around this room," the man continued, gesturing broadly. "Everyone here is successful, educated, important. And then you have people like this guy, just cleaning up after us." A few other people had started to notice the conversation. Some looked uncomfortable, but others seemed curious about what was happening. "It really makes you think about the natural order of things," the second man added. "Some people are born to lead, and others are born to serve." Ben finished emptying the trash can and tried to push his cart past the group, but the first man stepped directly in front of him. "Excuse me, sir," Ben said quietly, trying to stay polite. "Sir?" the man laughed. "Did you hear that? He called me sir. At least he knows his place." The group laughed, and Ben felt his face burning with embarrassment. More people were watching now, and he could see a mix of expressions around the room. Some people looked entertained by the show, others seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. "I bet this guy doesn't even understand what this merger means," the third man said. "Probably can't even pronounce the word merger." "Can you?" the first man asked Ben. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Ben looked down at the spilled wine, then up at the cruel faces surrounding him. He could see that some people in the crowd looked ashamed of what they were witnessing, but no one spoke up to defend him. Ben knelt down and began cleaning up the wine with paper towels from his cart. As he worked, he could hear whispered comments from the crowd. "This is terrible," someone said quietly. "Someone should stop this," another voice whispered. But no one moved. No one spoke up. Ben continued cleaning while 30 people watched in silence, and he had never felt so alone in his entire life. The first man stood over him, smiling with satisfaction. "That's better," he said. "Now you remember your place." As Ben finished cleaning and stood up, he saw something that made his heart sink even further. In the back of the crowd, he spotted a woman in an elegant navy suit watching everything with an expression he could not quite read. She was beautiful and commanding, clearly someone important, but Ben had never seen her before. What terrified him was the possibility that this woman, whoever she was, would remember this moment and he might lose his job. He needed this work desperately, and now his humiliation might cost him everything. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their celebration as if nothing had happened. Ben pushed his cart toward the exit, his hands still shaking and his heart pounding. He had 5 more hours of work ahead of him, but all he wanted was to disappear. Behind him, he could hear the cruel laughter starting up again, and he knew that this night would haunt him forever. Ben's hands continued to shake as he pushed his cleaning cart away from the celebration. The wine stain on the marble floor had been cleaned, but the stain on his dignity felt permanent. He could still hear the laughter echoing behind him as he made his way down the hallway toward the elevator. The woman in the navy suit had disappeared from his sight, but Ben could not stop thinking about her expression. She had watched everything happen without saying a word. He wondered if she would report the incident to his supervisor. The thought of losing this job terrified him more than the humiliation he had just endured. Ben reached the elevator and pressed the button for the lower floor. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal surface. His uniform was wrinkled, his face looked tired and defeated. For a moment, he wondered if the cruel men were right. Maybe this was all he would ever be. But then he thought about Emma and David sleeping safely in their beds at home, and he straightened his shoulders. He was not just a janitor. He was their father, their protector, their hero. No amount of cruelty from strangers could change that truth. The elevator opened on the 15th floor, and Ben continued his work. He cleaned offices methodically, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks. Each task helped calm his nerves and refocus his mind. He had work to finish, and his children were counting on him. Meanwhile, back at the celebration, the party continued without any acknowledgement of what had just happened. The group of men who had humiliated Ben were back to discussing their bonuses and vacation plans. The spilled wine had been forgotten, along with the person who had cleaned it up. "That was hilarious," the first man was saying to his friends. "Did you see his face when I poured the wine? He looked like he was about to cry." "You really put him in his place," the second man agreed. "These people need to remember where they belong in society." "I bet he goes home and tells his wife about his terrible day at work," the third man added with a laugh. "If he even has a wife. Who would marry someone like that?" The group continued their cruel conversation, unaware that someone very important had been watching them carefully. The woman in the navy suit had not left the building as Ben had thought. Instead, she had stepped into the hallway and was now standing quietly near the entrance to the conference room, listening to every word. Sarah Sterling had built her company from the ground up over 15 years. She had started with nothing but determination and brilliant ideas, working 18-hour days to create what was now one of the most successful corporations in the state. She knew the value of hard work better than anyone in that room. Sarah had arrived late to the celebration because she had been in back-to-back meetings all day finalizing the merger details. When she entered the building, she had planned to make a brief appearance at the party, thank her employees for their hard work, and then go home to her family. But instead, she had witnessed something that made her blood boil with anger. She had watched grown men humiliate a hard-working person for their own entertainment. She had seen a room full of people stand by and do nothing while cruelty played out in front of them. What made it worse was that she recognized the victim. She knew exactly who Ben was, though none of her employees had any idea about their connection. Sarah walked back into the conference room with purpose. Her expression was calm, but anyone who knew her well would recognize the dangerous look in her eyes. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone used to commanding respect and attention. The party continued around her as she made her way toward the group of men who were still laughing about their cruel joke. Sarah positioned herself where she could hear their conversation clearly. "I wonder what other jobs that guy has," the first man was saying. "Probably collects garbage or cleans toilets somewhere else. Can you imagine living such a pointless life? Some people are just born losers," the woman in the red dress added. "It's actually kind of sad when you think about it." "Not really," the second man disagreed. "If he wanted better, he would work for it. The fact that he's still a janitor at his age tells you everything you need to know about his character." Sarah had heard enough. She stepped forward into the circle of people, her presence immediately commanding attention. Conversation stopped as employees recognized their CEO and tried to look professional. "Good evening, everyone," Sarah said in a voice that was perfectly polite but carried an undertone that made people nervous. "I hope you're all enjoying the celebration." "Oh, Miss Sterling," the first man said quickly, straightening his tie. "We were just discussing the merger. Incredible work by the leadership team." "Thank you," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the faces around her. "I actually wanted to ask you about something I witnessed a few minutes ago. There seemed to be some kind of incident involving one of our cleaning staff." The group exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one wanted to admit what had happened, especially not to the CEO. "Oh, that," the woman in the red dress said with a dismissive wave. "It was nothing really. Just a small accident with some spilled wine." "An accident," Sarah repeated slowly. "That's interesting. Because from what I saw, it looked like someone deliberately poured wine on the floor and then demanded that our employee clean it up." The room was getting quieter as more people realized that their CEO was addressing a serious issue. The party atmosphere was quickly disappearing. "I think there might have been some misunderstanding," the second man said nervously. "We were just having a conversation." A conversation that included mocking someone for their job, their appearance, and their education level, Sarah said, her voice growing colder. A conversation that included assumptions about someone's intelligence and worth as a human being. The first man's face was turning red. "Ms. Sterling, I think you might have misheard what happened. We would never intentionally disrespect an employee." Sarah stepped closer to the group, and her voice dropped to a tone that made everyone around her very uncomfortable. "Let me tell you what I heard," she said slowly. "I heard grown professionals making jokes about someone who works 2 jobs to support his family. I heard people laughing about a man who has never missed a day of work in 3 years. I heard cruel comments about someone who reads business journals in his spare time and has submitted more useful suggestions to our improvement program than anyone else in this company." The group looked confused. How could their CEO know so much about a janitor? But most importantly, Sarah continued, her voice now carrying clearly across the room, "I heard people mocking my husband." The words hit the room like a physical force. Conversation stopped completely. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. The silence was so complete that the only sound was the soft background music that suddenly seemed inappropriately cheerful. "Your husband," the first man whispered, his face now completely pale. "That's my husband," Sarah said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. "Ben Sterling, the man you just humiliated for your entertainment, is my husband and the father of my children." The woman in the red dress looked like she was going to faint. The 3 men who had led the cruel joke stood frozen in place, their mouths open in shock. "That's impossible," the second man stammered. "He's just a janitor." Sarah's expression became even more dangerous. "Just a janitor? Let me educate you about my husband. Ben has a degree in business management. He chose to work these jobs after we got married because he wanted to understand every level of our company. He wanted to see how employees at every position were treated." The room was so quiet that people seemed afraid to breathe. "Every suggestion Ben has made based on his observations has improved our workplace," Sarah continued. "The new employee break schedule that increased productivity by 12%. That was Ben's idea. The improved cleaning supplies that saved us $50,000 last year. Ben researched those. The worker safety improvements that prevented 3 accidents this quarter. Ben identified those problems." Sarah looked around the room at the shocked faces staring back at her. "But more than that," she said, "Ben is a good man. He's a loving father who reads to our children every night. He's someone who volunteers at the local food bank on weekends. He's a person who has never said a cruel word about any of you, even though he comes home and tells me about every conversation he overhears." The first man tried to speak. "Ms. Sterling, we had no idea. If we had known. If you had known, you would have treated him differently." Sarah interrupted. "So you only show respect to people based on their connections and wealth? That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Sarah pulled out her phone and pressed a number. "Security. This is Sarah Sterling. I need you to come to the main conference room immediately." While they waited, Sarah continued speaking to the terrified group. "Ben didn't want me to interfere with his experiences here. He wanted to see how people really behaved when they thought no one important was watching. You've all given him a very clear picture." The elevator doors opened, and Ben stepped out, pushing his cleaning cart. He had finished the lower floors and was coming back to complete his work in the conference room. When he saw the crowd of people staring at him in complete silence, he stopped in confusion. "Ben," Sarah called out, and her husband looked up to see her standing in the middle of the room. Ben's expression changed from confusion to concern. "Sarah? What are you doing here? Is everything okay? Are the kids all right?" Sarah walked over to her husband and put her arms around him in front of the entire room. "The kids are fine. They're at home with your mother, remember?" Ben looked around at all the staring faces, then back at his wife. "Sarah, what's happening here?" "I was just explaining to your coworkers who you really are," Sarah said gently. "I think it's time to end this experiment, don't you?" Ben looked at the faces of the people who had been so cruel to him. He could see fear, shame, and disbelief in their expressions. The first man who had poured the wine looked like he wanted to disappear completely. Security guards entered the room, and Sarah turned to address them. "Please escort these individuals out of the building," she said, pointing to the group who had humiliated Ben. "They no longer work for Sterling Industries." "Ms. Sterling, please," the woman in the red dress begged. "We made a mistake. We'll apologize. We'll do anything." Sarah looked at her with cold eyes. The time for apologies was when you were watching someone being humiliated and chose to do nothing. The time for decency was when you decided to join in instead of standing up for what was right. As security led the group away, Sarah turned to address the rest of the room. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the space. "How you treat people when you think no one important is watching shows your true character. Sterling Industries will not tolerate cruelty, discrimination, or disrespect toward any employee, regardless of their position." The remaining employees looked appropriately ashamed and nervous. Ben put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I hope you know this means I can't continue the experiment." Sarah smiled at her husband. "I think we learned everything we needed to know." She turned back to the room one final time. "The celebration is over. I suggest everyone goes home and thinks carefully about the kind of people they want to be." As the employees filed out of the room in silence, Ben and Sarah stood together, holding each other close. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently. Ben nodded. "I'm okay. But I'm ready to go home to our children." "Me too," Sarah agreed. They walked toward the elevator together, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the lesson they had learned that night.